All right. So we have Dr. Kelly Starrett here. He's a physical therapist, author, and co-founder of the Ready State. He co-founded San Francisco CrossFit, co-authored multiple books to include New York Times bestsellers, Becoming a Supple Leopard, Desk Bound, Ready to Run, and Built to Move more recently. And Kelly consults with athletes and coaches from the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, Major League, the Olympic team, and works with elite military forces. So Kelly, thanks for joining us today and being part of the performance rehab revolution.
Hell yeah.
Big drop. Sweet. You want to
Yeah.
jump off?
Yeah. So I guess to kick it off, right? You've done a lot in your career. You're like the pioneer.
I'm like 50. I haven't even started yet. I just have a seat
Oh.
at the table. Don't just be like, you're done a lot with your career.
You're doing a lot, right? You're like the pioneer. The reason why there's like lacrosse balls in every
Sorry, everybody. It's totally true. It's me.
right.
I'm sorry.
So I mean, you've been making waves in the industry for years. Looking back, I guess I kind of want to know, like in the beginning, like what was your intention? Multi-part question. What was your intention, and what kind of influenced you to do things the way that you did? That was just so off the beaten path from the way the industry typically works.
Great question. The first thing is, I set out to pay off my student loan debt. So,
Relatable.
Step one. Step two, I owned a gym. So I started the gym my second year of physio school. And I think you have to understand that early on, I recognized that the traditional physio model was not for me. But there were no places to go. There was no one to look at and say, that's the one I want to do. Every single clinic I was in, I was like, this place is hell. I'm never going to be here. I'd walk in and feel the power dynamics. And I was like, this has a hung ceiling and no squat rack. And you're not speaking the language of athletes. I had been an athlete on the U.S. canoe and kayak team. I professionally paddled in the World Cup until a brachial plexus injury took me out. And I went right down that rabbit hole of like broken athlete who was like, make it stop. Give me the cortisone, give me the prednisone, give me the acupuncture. Let me see the physical therapist, home pump, neck traction, MRIs, massage, anything I could do. Of course, in retrospect, I'm like, hey, it was totally my fault. It would have been a little bit nicer to have a little bit better understanding of could I have prevented this? Because it wasn't trauma. It was 100% overuse of my own making. And recognizing, of course, that it's complex. I had terrible athletic-induced asthma. I was paddled, on one side of a canoe. I was taking 20 puffs off my rescue inhaler every day to just get through the 3 training sessions. Probably not great. It's a lot of albuterol, everyone. And what I recognized in that moment when I started asking questions, people were like, hey, this always happens. And I was like, you knew this was going to happen to me? Like, yeah. When we get really high volume towards national team trials, usually someone gets injured. And I was like, so this was preventable. And they're like, well, no, I didn't say that. And I was like, hey, every woman on the national team has had shoulder surgery. If my daughter's dream in the future is to be on the national team, should we just have a proactive shoulder surgery? Just elect it because she's going to be on the national team with shoulder surgery? And they were like, don't ask that question. So my physio experience there, I did have a moment where I was like, oh, this isn't great. And when I decided to go to physio school, I discovered that there's a real disconnect between the language we're using in high performance and the language we're using in physio. It's like physio is classic Greek, and over here we're in a completely different language. And all the rehab didn't really smell like performance. In fact, all the athletes on the national team, all the athletes and the Olympians I ran into, superstars, had nothing to do with physical therapy unless they were injured. And the physical therapy they were getting was so far removed from the point where the rubber hit the road, and was like a temporary thing to babysit the tissues until you could go back and then reclaim your fitness, instead of someone being like, hey, we don't have range of motion here. Your nutrition is crappy. You're a stress case. Your breathing is awful. You don't have any down regulation. The session cost is awful. So there I am in physio school, and I discovered CrossFit my first year of physio school, but opened this gym my second year. And immediately I'm coaching and going to physical therapy school. And I'm also simultaneously getting out of class early because I have a new baby, because that's what you should do in physio school, is start a gym, have a baby, right? And um, I have this excuse and I'm coaching a nationally ranked high school rowing team. So I'm having this thing where I'm seeing a gym, I'm seeing athletes train, and I'm in physio school. And I literally am like, these three things have nothing to do with each other. And so what I set out to do with the gym was, as I was working along with people, it was like I could see everything in real time. I was understanding what was happening, that the stimulus for adaptation was the diagnostic tool. And I was like, why would I wait around? And I remember driving into the gym one day and I called the CAPTA, the California Physical Therapy Association. I was like, can I mobilize if someone doesn't have pain? If it's like for performance. And they were like, well, I don't know why you do that, but yeah, it's fine. Because I suddenly had, literally everyone, I suddenly had some MMA guys who are having a hard time with their guard. They were here for a shoulder, but they were like talking about guard. And I was like, well, hey, let me do this hip quadrant on you that I learned from Mulligan. And then they were like, holy crap, I just destroyed the meat and my hips were so open and I could get into these shapes. And I was like, well, the shapes you were in were just native physiology. And all I did was apply the same sets of power tools I was doing when someone had a problem, but they weren't reporting a hip problem. They were just reporting a performance limitation. So that was really the start of having my mind blown. And then I was like, well, why do I have to have a physio here? Like, why can't I take this band, which is in powerlifting in every gym, and start applying it to the joints and then figure out how to do these mobilizations, these joint mobilizations myself to restore position. And what we started to see was that athletes who had better access to their native physiology, again, normal range of motion. That's why you had to memorize and get married to Norkin and White. You had to memorize that bullshit, you know, and it was the first time I was like, oh, this is really important, because it wasn't me measuring some post surgery to get someone out of pain. It was like, every human being should be able to do this. Why can't you do this? You're swimming slower than you should be able to. You're running slower than you should be able to because you don't have any hip extension. So where do we own that? Do we wait till someone blows up, is on fire, comes to our clinic, and is suddenly like, hey, I don't know why my knee hurts. I'm like, well, let's treat your knee. By the way, I'm not even being reimbursed for actually improving your performance or wattage. I'm not being reimbursed for looking at your hip extension. I'm not being reimbursed for teaching you, right, or reprogramming. I'm just getting you out of pain to go pass you on. That all happened in the gym. So suddenly the gym becomes the place where we can understand complex human movement, because the gym is such a simple place where we can control 100% of the variables and manipulate and regress and progress variables. And that was where I really started to have my head set on fire. But then the tools of like voodoo floss and lacrosse balls, that was just me trying to solve the problems of saying, I think you all can't come see me. I have 400 athletes I'm responsible for. Who's going to be responsible for this? Who's going to take care of the congestion? Who's going to manage the tissue? Who's going to get you out of pain so we can train today? Who's going to desensitize this tissue so we can lift? Because you have a big game coming up. And that's where the focus was to change my own community. The people that I was serving had nothing to do with, let me become a famous physical therapist. What a bunch of horseshit that is. Instead, you need to be hyper local and solve the problems of your people. And then be in a network where you're like, dude, did you try this? This is crazy. Have you seen this? What is it you're doing there? Because I need to learn that, because I can take that home and impact the people I'm working with day to day. So that was always the goal. And I may be, super passionate and nerdy on this stuff and like to hang out, but suddenly I was having access to all of these disparate communities and trying to really figure out how these systems accommodated. Why is powerlifting? What did we learn from it? What can we learn from Olympic lifting? How does the gymnastics help my runners? And because I was in CrossFit, whether you like CrossFit or not, all of this is born of CrossFit. And what we suddenly had was a unifying field theory of movement that was called classic strength conditioning. I've been on every continent except Antarctica to teach. Everyone knows what a push-up is. So why are we talking about shoulder extension when you talk about push-up shoulder? Right? So it's a lot easier to put it in the language that people understand, which is movement. And I'm going to bum people out, but science is not the universal movement, not the language of human beings. Math is not. The universal language is play. The universal language is moving your body. And ultimately, as Juliet, my co-founder and CEO, says, humans do two things together. We eat together and we move together. That's it. So why aren't we putting our energy more into understanding the movement piece? And now what we're seeing on the internet is just a function of, hey, we're starting to put movement back into the language. We can argue about it and be special about it, but that's really the magic.
Yeah, that's a huge, uh, that's taking it where it's physical therapy of what's traditional and then going in a completely different, better trajectory. So how was that received?
Oh, that's such a good question. Everyone was super stoked about that. Look, what I'm always saying is, why don't we practice in the fullest expression of our practice act? So you're a super nerdy pelvic floor therapist. You're super nerdy. You love to work with kids. Cool. Let's actually reclaim the area that we could practice in. And no diss on where we came from. So at my physical therapy school at Samuel Merritt, we had all of these badass Maitland trained, Australian trained physical therapists. We were tied into Kaiser. We had the daily drivers, Steve shout out at the World Center for PNF at Kaiser Vallejo. These are my daily instructors, like people working and using the stuff, solving real problems. And they came out there. A lot of the instructors that I had in the last 2 years or 3 years of physio school, they retired after that, after my class. So we had the people who started the physical therapy program who came out of the tradition of, man, doctors don't even think we deserve to be a profession. They were the people who fought for the word physical therapy. They were who battled the physiatrists. And so I think we were in this weird flux where physical therapists were striving to attach ourselves for legitimacy. So we attached ourselves to the medical model and the reimbursement through insurance. I think that was the best play available. So at the time, we weren't in high performance environments unless we were injured, right? And even then, it had nothing to do with high performance. Like you saw the physical therapist, then you came back and your coach, and your coaches didn't even want you to go see the physio because you'd become detrained and weak, and they would tell you not to lift or move. So understanding that, I don't think I did anything different. I just took the next step and said, here's all the things we can do. In fact, I think the physical therapy training is the best training to really understand pathology and tissue systems. You start to overlay that with coaching, and there's a reason why we see so many physios now who are the lead performance. They're performance leads at so many different places because they speak medical model, they speak nutrition, they speak high performance. We're starting to see that the physio is a really capable person. She can go into these high performance models and really manage all of these systems so well because of our fundamental training. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to go work in a hospital or an outpatient orthopedic clinic and see someone's total knee for, twice a week for 40 minutes. Like that, I think is a fine expression of the system, but it's not, using all the cylinders or all the gears on the Ferrari.
Yeah.
And the second part of that was people thought I was crazy. There was a lot of pushback because it was a dangerous idea. Who owns this? Who owns positions? What are we giving away? How many hips have I dislocated? 0, right? How many anterior hips have we stretched out and become flaccid? None. What we saw was, holy moly, people are really smart. And if we give them tools, they'll manage it. And frankly, what I'm hoping we can do is I'm hoping we can unload all the unskilled care from physical therapy. I think we're starting to see that. I think all the trainers on the internet are like, here's what you can do for your labral tear. It's called clamshells and leg slides. And I'm like, thank God someone else is teaching that. So I can actually get to the skilled care of your management of your system and practice as a doctor, not doing this low level short arc quad crap. I mean, there's a place for that, but I want someone to have already come to me and said, this is all the things I'm doing. I learned this on the internet. Now what? Right. And that's what we're trying to do. Let's unload skilled care. Let's get back to skilled care.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. In our practice, we see a lot of the same things. Like people have a fresh surgery, and like we'll give them some tips of like, the swelling management, the stuff they're not going to get the traditional office.
That's right.
Like, you do that stuff and then come back to us later when you're ready to like get going. We do try to set them up for success because they, all the icing and like then they're just trying to bend knees that are just swollen and congested and just needs to be managed with the swelling. So that makes total sense. So in your mind, if you look at like the state of the industry today, what do you think is the number one thing that's still missing from most physical therapist practice?
I don't know if anything's missing so far. That what we're going to have to do is evolve to incorporate and grow a little bit more. So we're going to have to fundamentally I think, ask two questions. The first question is it required for me to practice at a high level to be the only practitioner with the patient for an hour? Is that really the best thing? Could I have, in a lot of situations, a health coach or a really good strength and conditioning coach to run my program? And I think that actually is a high expression. Look, I love one-on-one. I love coaching. I love it. But my gym, which we ran for almost 18 years, we had a whole lot of coaches who could manage box squats and soft tissue mobilization and actually train that person and regress that person, right? And I might say, hey, this is what we're going to focus on. Hey, we're going to keep that knee super vertical for a while until this tissue calms down. So they knew how to figure that out. So number one is asking the question, do I have to be the only person in the room all the time? Because we've been fighting for that, right? Because what we saw was like, oh, you're managing 16 people at once. And what we saw was really low level sort of cookie cutter care. And I think the one person, one physician, one physical therapist for an hour is a result of that. And there's a time and a place. If you want to get paid for concierge physical therapy and do 2 hours, you do you. But what I'm saying is, I think if we're going to actually scale this thing where people can make good livings, it's going to be ultimately where you're the physician, you're the practitioner with a doctoral degree, and you're running the healthcare for a whole group of people and who are highly skilled and trained and managed by you. Okay, that's not our current system. I'm not talking about physical therapy aides doing low-level shit while you bill, right? The second thing I think is we have to maybe reinvent the whole model about reimbursement, because I don't mean insurance, not insurance, Benedetto versus, Mate. I'm saying we may need to rethink in the regular physical therapy model how many times we're seeing someone. Is that enough? That person had to take a day off from work, half day off and get a referral. Ultimately, if you think about the kind of care that you can deliver to someone in 30 minutes, what the fuck are we talking about? This is a complex person. Sorry, my language, everybody. This is a complex person with complex psycho-emotional needs, with a complex environmental history. And I'm going to have to teach them a whole lot of things. Can I do that in a 30-minute session every 10 days? Can I do that in a 45-minute session every 10 days? No, you cannot. So we have this type 1 error in the system that no one's talking about, that ultimately I might need to spend 2 hours with someone, or I might have to have lots of contact day after day after day after day to unwind. So, the physios are like, oh yeah, sleep, I take sleeper. And I'm like, really? When and where? And who's getting paid for that? Because you don't. You're giving some lip service to that shit. And what I'm telling you is that we are seeing a lot of dirty data and making a lot of decisions clinically about people who aren't eating, people who aren't sleeping, people who aren't walking, people who don't have move their bodies during the day. And then we're like, hey, let me give you these 3 sets of 15. And we think that's going to work. If that's working, that's because human beings are so rad and we're so ready to heal. So I want to wrap our arms around all of these complex environmental health behaviors, which we're starting to see. Lifestyle medicine, physical therapists, not physicians, should be leading the lifestyle medicine effort, where we are getting people into health and wellness, whether that's, hey, I want to look better naked and feel better for my kids, or that knee is super congested. And, I remember the first time I had to have a talk with someone about nutrition. I'm just graduated. I'm working in this fancy physical therapy clinic. I see a person in front of me with a meniscus transplant. How many meniscus transplants have you all treated? Handful, one,
Yeah.
right? I was seeing them all the time. People were coming in for these complex meniscus transplants, and his knee looked like it was on fire, like a garbage dump. And I was like, dude, you're going to reject this. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, what did you have for breakfast? He's like, a box of cereal. And I was like, what kind of cereal? And he had like eaten a whole box of Fruit Loops. And I was like, bro, like, you don't like, he's like, what? I should be eating something else, And I was like, yeah. And so this is 19, I mean, whenever it was, early 2000s, where I'm literally like, you didn't hit some minimums on your protein. You don't have any micronutrients on your board. You're just dumping sugar into this inflammatory response, or I'm like, oh, this $10,000 thing you paid for out of pocket is going to get rejected by your knee, and then you're going to be screwed. And that is a good case of, whose job is that? Well, if I'm going to be the primary caregiver for this person in front of me, I'm going to need to understand how that person is living so that I can help them in the way. And it may not be a stiff tissue. It may be we have a sort of an adaptation error from the fact that the person's not moving, not sleeping, not eating, doesn't eat micronutrients, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we're going to have to become better experts. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to get paid for that, or we're going to figure out how we have to have enough time to be able to have these immediate conversations.
Yeah, wearing the PT hat isn't just the exercises, it's everything that contributes to the healing. I think to your point with some of the higher level physical therapy, compared to like the short arc quads and the early things early on, even what we've seen with our continuing education program is when most people come in, it's the clinical reasoning in the beginning to figure out what's going on. But
Yeah.
where they have a really hard time is bridging the gap
That's
between
right.
like it's the okay, they're doing all this simple stuff, and now how do I push the gas a little bit to make it harder?
I think that's true. And that I always want to just remind everyone that everyone comes from somewhere. And it's not your fault if that place you came from didn't value that or didn't know how to teach it. Or how about this? I talked to enough physical therapy instructors where I say, well, what are you going to cut out of your program? Or they ask me, what should we cut out of the program? I'm like, well, the program needs to be 5 years long. And you know what I mean? It's a real question about how can we get someone minimally competent and then simultaneously say that's not the end, but now you're safe to go out and begin this conversation, because what you're seeing is that we're products of our system. And if your system doesn't include regression and progression of actual movements, then you're going to start to see what is the 1 rep max clamshell? I'm waiting for the answer. I don't hear it on the internet. What is the 1 rep max clamshell? How much? 300 pounds? At what speed? I mean, suddenly I'm like, okay, that doesn't scale. So, so much of my thinking is always rooted in this high performance model where ultimately speed is the best idea. And if something can't be done fast, then it doesn't necessarily inform us about what the highest expression of the movement is. This is why you can squat any way you want. You can round your back, you can dump your feet in, because squatting is a low power movement. And as long as squatting is low power, low force generation, I know it's heavy and you're grindy, but you can get away with murder, but you can't do that fast. So as long as we're not, our rehab language correlates for movement, because that's what they are. We're loading tissues. We're thinking about physiology. We're thinking about blood flow. We're not thinking about how that system gets put back together piecemeal. It doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. So there's nothing wrong with leg extensions, but don't kid yourself. The leg extension has to go along with skill. And ultimately, one of my favorite coaches is Franz Bosch. If you have not watching Franz Bosch, you should. Um, he says, all strength conditioning is just resistance training with coordination. So it's really coordination training. Now we're adding resistance. And as soon as we strip out coordination training, you have lost the narrative, and no longer are you relevant to this conversation about human performance, because all you're doing is saying, and look, it would be a lot easier. Let's give everyone some cocaine, some blood flusher, some blood flow restriction cuffs, and some steroids. And literally, I will have motivation, high work tolerance, huge tissues. I mean, if that's all it takes, so let's just do it. The cocaine makes you uncomfortable. Good. Just go steroids and BFR and bikes, and we're fine. And and by the way, the steroids cocaine is an old powerlifting model that worked really well until it didn't. So
Go figure.
my point here is it's not just about physiology. It's about the expression of the physiology. And I think the problem is sometimes, what does our training room look like? And ultimately, shouldn't we be training someone 3 to 5 times a week? That's the kind of coordination skill practice we need to get into until they're doing it themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. We try to, or we don't try to, we do highly correlate with our local strength and conditioning coaches.
Yeah.
And anyway,
Yeah.
anytime
Yeah.
somebody comes in,
Yes.
it's like, hey, this is what's going on. These are kind of the guidelines. You do your thing. We'll let you know after we see him again if we need to progress or change anything, or there's any modifications. But like, feel free to progress and regress within your realm. And it's a great system, and it really helps people.
Yeah.
Out.
And I want to, I think we had a lot of talking about interdisciplinary, cooperation. And I was like, well, what does that really mean? Well, it means for me is that I, will get a call from, Olympian, two-time world champion, having this problem, can't finish a World Cup season. And I asked the question before we get into, how your hip moves, how is your sleep? And I'm not a good sleeper. Well, can you tell me about your nutrition? Well, the way I solved this problem, this human performance problem from this mutant athlete, was to connect him to one of the most brilliant sports nutritionists I know, and they got that sorted. Sleep starts to get sorting, fueling is better. Guess what? That person is going to the Olympics. That person is, top 3, getting podiums, crushing it. Had nothing to do with me, but it was enough for me to say, I think this is our biggest opportunity. Let's start here. And that person's in my network, right? So that's what we need to do, is continue to be, I think, the person in the middle says, hey, I think you need to see a physician. I think you could really benefit from soft tissue work. I think you could go see this chiro over here. And then now you're in my network. And that person's gonna be like, okay, here's my problem. How do I solve it? And now we can actually scale. And again, you can do a smaller version of that in your own clinic, probably having a performance nutrition person there, or a lifestyle coach, right? If you're managing someone with chronic pain and you're not talking about all these things day after day, someone texting them that's the level of tightly coupled care that we need. The kind of care you'd almost get in a hospital, believe it or not, which is not the best model for health, but you get the idea. Someone is touching base with you so many times. That's how we're really going to see change.
There's a high level of accountability, lots of touch point, everybody with their own area of expertise that can chip in and really take care of the person. So what I'm hearing is build your network to include these people. So
yeah. And you're going to have to go find them, and they're there, and they will solve problems for you. One of the way, look, I laugh about like the HIPAA stuff. I'm like, the number of cold emails where people are like, can you read my MRI and this naked X-ray? I'm like, all right, I guess this is public domain now. And but simultaneously, one of the things I've done is, for a lot of the very high level athletes, we just create a WhatsApp closed group of everyone who's part of the team responsible for that person. And then it's really easy to put all the documents, have all the pieces, jump on calls. And then it's not in my text, it's in this WhatsApp connection. And that's been a great place for us to sort of begin to wrap our heads around what we're going on, and people to really feel like they're part of a community of performance. And again, look, your athletes or your clients may not be going to the Olympics, right, or a world championship, but they may be needing to show up for this wedding. And what you might be able to do is have 1 or 2 people as part of that team, or a family member as part of that team, right? Or if it's a parent, a kid, and your physical therapist, that's a great place to put things, and to pull that coach in. So it's not a big lift. I think a lot of times we're like, well, when am I going to answer this email and tie these people together? Well, this is really, I think, a great expression of WhatsApp, is that that coach can be on there. Videos can you watch this set? Yes, click. Can I watch that? Can you see how this is going? What do you think about this? And I can have these tightly coupled interactions with this system and the person in the middle, without having to go out and recreate some kind of horrible system where I'm trying to get all these people together. Everyone is on WhatsApp. It's so easy. So, I mean, again, how do we reduce the barriers to adherence? That's the thing that I wrote my case report on.
Go ahead.
I think that's a really creative way to get everybody involved, and also streamlines it. I think a lot of clinicians, one, probably lack the confidence to go talk to other people, even especially people who maybe know more about strength conditioning than they do, because they're not the expert in that bucket too, because they come out and they're like, I'm a PT, and they have no background in
But I got no
any of the other stuff.
Oh, for sure. I know you're about to make a point. I just want to say, I apologize to everyone at my gym when I was a young PT student. I sucked. Like, whoa, I'm so sorry. But you were part of my learning process, and it's okay to say and defer to that expert person as you're building your skills. Just everyone knows that, PT school, you come out and you can never make a mistake. You have to be the expert. You have to get on the internet and debate the research and be evidence-based. Just be like, coach, how have you solved this in the past? Did that work for you? What do you think about this? You know what I mean? Like, it's so easy to be curious and to approach every person with this sort of curiosity. I think that gets us out of imposter syndrome. It gets us out of the need to, like, I got my piece in, and be really curious with that person. How'd that make you feel? Right. One of the things that I was just talking with my friend, and again, I want to get back to your point, Stuart McMillan, who is the CEO of Olympic Track and Field, you'll see a dozen of his athletes at the Olympics this year. He's probably the most successful Olympic coach in the world. I said, I made this switch a few years ago where I stopped showing up for the athlete and I started showing up for myself. That my experience with the athlete is for my edification and my advancement and my knowledge. And when I focus on my understanding and that curiosity, they get the best out of me because I'm approaching it with such curiosity and I'm trying something, getting feedback, and boy, that was terrible. And suddenly tomorrow they'll get a much better iteration of me. And I think that curiosity is what I want to approach in those WhatsApp apps. Tell me your story. What's going on? What's working? Hey, have we tried this? And sometimes the things I throw out there, people are like, "Where'd you learn that?" I'm like, my friends, soccer coaches told me about this. So I think that's what's really nice is that when we're in that mode, then I don't have to be an expert to build I don't have to have this complete Fabergé egg of experience. I just need to have the stand, and then I'm going to start assembling the egg over the course of my career.
Yeah. You go out and you learn and you meld from other people. And to your point, it's the networking. I remember getting out of PT school and I had just graduated and there's like this eagerness, right? Like you're so excited and you have your DPT now. And I remember somebody at the CrossFit gym that I was dropping in at rolled their ankle and I like ran over and the coach was already looking at it. And I was like, I can look at this for you. I was like, it's a sprain.
You've turned your ankle.
Yeah. And I like went through all the testing and I was like, but just to be safe, you might want to go get it x-rayed. And they were like, whatever. And like, then you get in there and you realize you have the eagerness, but you also, still lack a lot of the expertise because you don't have the experience yet.
You don't
like
have any miles.
all built. Yeah.
You're a Ferrari with no miles.
Yeah. I never went back to that gym. But I think that's the point of like, it's the DPT is a permission to play at this point. Just
I love that.
The curriculums of what's included. And, it does, to your point, like need to be more built out. Like people do need to have more of an expert hat in more of the realms instead of just touching on it for one thing. But you have to be a generalist in so many areas.
Yeah. A savage generalist. And there's 2 points that I think you highlight that I'd love to double click on. One is, where are you getting coaching and advanced training daily? And hopefully you're part of a movement practice. And that movement practice could be Pilates, it could be yoga, it could be CrossFit, it could be Olympic lifting. You need to be coached or in a coached environment. I think one of the things that we set ourselves up are like DPT stands for autonomy, aloneness. I am the expert, and I might touch base with another expert at a conference, but it's me and by myself. Forget that. Go be a rank beginner again and put your ego aside and just suck at something and get some coaching. And what you'll see is like, wow, this is really good. It gave me 1,000 ideas. Oh, I can't wait to try this. I'm ripping this off and going right over here. If you get into on our site, we have these 14-day like programming tracks for people. And I did like a splits track. And as soon as you're in the splits, it's just long lever Pilates done without a reformer. I'm like, the Pilates and yogis have been doing this forever, people. Like, come on, Warrior One. I mean, like, seriously, like, all I did was take your knee and I straightened it, and it's the splits, And so understand that there have been people working on the problems of the human condition for a long, long time, and go get coached. I think that's a really huge thing. The second thing I just coached, that's on my mind. I was just able to be part of the staff of the women's water polo team for Cal Berkeley. And we just made it to the national championship game last weekend in the tournament. And no one thought we'd get there. We haven't been there in 15 years. And one of our coaches, our head coach, is the first woman head coach ever to be in an NCAA final in water polo. So we just happened to shatter a glass ceiling. But our staff, the core staff, is 7 of us. And guess who is not the athletic trainer? This guy. I'm like, hey, Ann, who is just a ninja at solving cramps problems, hydration, nutrition, putting out fires, scraping, cupping. I'm like, hey, Ann, how did you solve this? What do you think? Hey, when I see like Ann, I'm just like, Ann, like, is 25 years of being, she has a master's in athletic training and has been working this division. She's seen everything. If someone dislocates her shoulder, I'm like, where's Ann? I'm like, I can relocate his shoulder, but Ann is the shit. So number one is that I'm attached myself to Ann and I'm like, teach me, oh goddess, right? Second is that I'm on the bench with the lead performance, mindset person, this performance psychologist. And when we're in camp in Greece together, and when that guy teaches, I'm showing up, doing all the drills, paying attention. How does he learn? What are you thinking about? And if I had to go back to school now, I'd be like, I need to go back to school for a doctoral degree in performance psychology. I'm like, forget this like stretching, squatting thing. I'm like, the mindset right now is the greatest limitation. So I get to be party to this. And don't you kid yourself. I rip that guy off right into my clinics, right into the conversations I'm having around safety and feeling actualized and being part of a community and having those conversations. So my point is exactly what you're saying is that you can take a second and really develop that expertise by just being curious and attaching yourself and being of service. Even I'm just a volunteer. I'm a volunteer physical therapist at Cal. I mean, I work with all the teams and the sports med, and I'm a little different kind of than your average bear volunteer, it's really just so I can work with these women and try to win a national championship. And some of the things I talk about are like, hey, let's eat before we practice. You know what I mean? Because I think that's, one of the biggest things I learned this year is I started having for the last year, we're doing weekly soft tissue sessions with all the athletes where I teach the athletes how to solve their own pain problems and range of motion problems. And I had been doing this with the women's water polo team for months and months and months and months. And towards the end of the season, we started picking up volleyball and some other things. And our girls were like, these women were like, man, these volleyball people don't know crap about how their bodies work. And I was like, that was you like 9 months ago. And now our women are so sophisticated on mobilizing each other, putting their hands on each other. And the reason is there's no one in those positions to do that. So if we don't step up into that vacuum will be solved with THC and ibuprofen and bourbon and percussion and whatever things that the athlete can do to make herself feel better. And what we have this real opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to be the expert in teaching you everything I know about how you can care for your body. And when you run out of problems, come see me. That is a great business model.
Yeah, for sure. If I go back a step when you're talking about learning from everybody and like putting Anne, like she's the goddess, right? Like that requires a level of humility that a lot of people struggle with, right? They come out and there is the ego and the chip on their shoulder. So like we try to learn from everybody, like anybody that we interact with, like you can always learn from people, right?
They're real good. They're really good at their job. You just got to listen.
Yeah. You just have to be open to it and realize that like, hey, you don't know everything. You don't have to be the authority. Like I've learned so much from so many different people. And I was a lot like you. Actually, you're the reason I got into PT school and then I got into
Sorry, not sorry.
This motherfucker lied to me. Now I got to figure this out myself. Well, no, which is great, right? But it's like I also had a gym, a CrossFit gym, like 250 members, where I have to like trial and error shit. And it's
yeah.
I see people now that come and like, oh, I still do this thing that you taught me, and I'm like, oh, stop doing that. Don't do that anymore. But if we kind of bring it back around to some of your more recent work with like movement vital signs, right? Why don't we talk about that? Like, how did the idea of movement vital signs like come about?
Isn't it crazy that we don't have movement vital signs? First of all,
Yeah.
like it's crazy. Like I literally am like, what? Wait, what? Conversation I had with Gray Cook, who has been leading us all for so long and holding the door open for this alternative model of like not writing soap notes and actually being in performance environments. People loved this on the FMS. As an aside, can I see your cell phone from 1996, please? Can I see your car from 1996, please? So in 1996, that thing was the hotness. Like people were not exercising. They were not overhead squatting. They're not doing any of this. So keep in mind that 1996, he blew everyone's mind with this thing. So that's what that is. And the idea was, let's give you a place where you can understand some position minimums. So he was talking with Shirley Sarmon about the need. Wouldn't it be great if everyone saw a physical therapist once a year for a checkup? And she literally was like, what would you check? You wouldn't know. Some arbitrary thing. You could step up on this box, do this Maitland quick test, and your knee didn't hurt, check your box. Like we didn't have those vital signs. But fast forward a few decades, and suddenly we realized, why don't we have environmental minimums? Like we now have enough data and we have enough research, and we have enough clinical experience and practice to say 7 hours is our minimum for sleep. We really want to be 8. And if you're trying to heal, it's 9. And like what we say is that below 7, just no one thrives. In fact, if people are sleep adapted, they get 8 hours of sleep. If you put someone in a dark room for 16 hours for 2 weeks, they'll sleep a ton and ton and ton. Eventually they'll sleep 8 hours because they've actually sleep adapted, just like fat adaptation. So, it's very controversial to tell people you need to sleep more, but now we have this vital sign where we start to see you can survive, but you're not going to thrive, right? You can now create vital signs around what we think are decent protein intake and micronutrient intake and decongestion and walking. We found that it wasn't 10,000. We found out 8,000 was a pretty good number clinically, and you got 50% of all cause mortality drop for 8,000 steps. We're like, cool, that's a cool vital sign. So some of them we chose based on those ideas of here's what best practice looks like, and here's how it really can be working with someone's life, so that we can begin to start to say, we saw in the pandemic that everyone was real comfortable with SaO2. They were real comfortable with temperature. We were just like, oh, you're monitoring respiration rate? Great. How deep should you be able to squat? And they were like, what? How long should you be able to stand on one leg? What? So all we did was just say, hey, let's just expand this vital sign language. If 120/80 is just average blood pressure, and everyone knows that, then let's go ahead and start to say, hey, this is a reasonable amount of range of motion. You should be able to get up and down off the ground without using your hands, right? And it doesn't mean you're going to die or have a hip pathology, but it starts to say you're going to have fewer movement choices. You may have tissue stiffness that reduces your quality of life or prevents you from learning a new skill effectively, or et cetera, fall along the line. None of that, though, is about do this or you'll die, or do this or you'll get injured. It's about, boy, you should be able to do these things because that's what the human physiology indicates we should be able to do. And when we begin to suddenly put those vital signs into the hands of enough people, then we can have the next conversation, because someone comes in and says, hey, I was in the airport today and I put my arms over my head, and my wife was like, why are your elbows bent and you're banana backing? And you're like, vital sign. So I think what we've tried to do, and again, the way my brain works is I need to understand patterns and how things relate. That is like the number one driver of my thinking. So we have this built to move set of vital signs, which were really low level. 120/80 isn't great blood pressure. Neither is magical about walking 8,000. But now we have a place to start where we can start to simplify the system so we can understand inputs and outputs. Our 101 course and our app, we actually have movement assessments and correlates for movement and components of movement that can be run by a person, not a physical therapist. That's why it's red, yellow, green, not 98%, 20, forget that. Just red, yellow, green. Oh, dude, it's not complete range. You should be in the green. It should be complete, but guess what? It's probably not your red, your problem. And then we have this sort of high level piece where we take clinicians and coaches and we actually have them use the sets of tools, which are just more sophisticated versions of these movement minimums. Because honestly, the hip isn't that complicated. It really does just a handful of things. Your shoulder goes up above, it goes in front, it goes out to the side, it goes in the back. That's all the shoulder does. So quit freaking out. So let's go ahead and just start, your elbow gets bent and you start to rotate, it gets complicated, but it's still not that complicated.
Yeah. So for PTs, and you touched on this a little bit, but as far as implementing this into everyday clinical care, is it just educating patients when they come in of, hey, you need to be able to do these things?
Such a great question, because I want to do these things. I want to have these conversations with my person who's there. So if someone there for a specific problem, I'm probably going to need to focus on that problem. And in order to resolve that problem, I might have these tangential conversations. If I'm their coach every day, which I want to be, because then I can actually have meaningful conversations. As a running a gym, you get to have 3 to 5 contact hours as a clinician a week with someone. Holy moly, we can actually get something done, right? That's one of my favorite part about coaching, is that it's set up to have lots of little micro conversations. And then this week we're focusing on internal rotation of the hip. And then this week we're going to talk about how many grams of vegetables you ate, right? What I think is we need to ask what is happening in that situation first, in terms of what's the person there for? How am I helping them solve this problem? They didn't know they needed a health coach, but so I'm going to back into that. We wrote Built to Move as a solution for busy clinicians. So first and foremost, everything that we ever do, just understand I'm a coach talking to other coaches. Like, if you really want to understand my brain, I don't really care about working with athletes directly. What I really care about is working with organizations and working with coaches, because I feel like that's the most fun for me. I get to nerd out the most. was just at the University of Michigan football. I'm working with them. Pretty good football team, evidently. I didn't realize it was a cult, but they're there, and the things that their nutritionist is doing is so progressive and mind blowing that I literally was like, I have pages of notes. I got in the car and I'm blah 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 blah. Don't forget this. Blah. Like I get to be in these communities, and the real conversation is where and when are we going to have this level of detail around some of these things. So my number one thing is I love to work with coaches. The ultimately though, what I'm trying to do is say, here are all the things I've learned in high performance for the last 20 years. We should be able to take those lessons and transmute them to improve our families and our communities and our neighbors. And that's what Built to Move is. If you're a high performance physio, a high performance practitioner, you're like, oh, okay, I can spin all of these things up to meet the needs of my world champion. But I also want to be able to say, hey, I want to have this next conversation with you. I'd like you to do a little homework outside the gym and read this, or go to Built to Move and do the 21-day, builttomove.com, and do the 21-day follow along, which we built for free for clinicians to be able to like, hey, I'm not sure on this thing as I'm trying to manage this really pissed off Achilles, that we have time to also talk about these other things. So let's see if we can work on this environmental health, try these things first. So that's what I was trying to do there. And again, I think ultimately we're trying to say, let's begin a conversation day one of saying, hey, we're going to treat this, but we want to make sure we're actually managing the underlying conditions. Otherwise, we're just physicians handing out, right, high blood pressure medicine, which is fine, but I only have 6 minutes to manage your complex lifestyle. So it's a pill. I only have 6 minutes to handle your complex, 30 minutes to handle your complex knee problem. It's probably going to look something, like an analog to that. But I think we have the option of expanding that thing. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I think changing the industry, to your point, is the injury and the side conversations, and then also like treating the healthy people who have other areas that they could be improving. It's just invisible almost.
Yeah. And remember, people probably, like we said, we all come from somewhere, and a lot of us don't have any background. This is all brand new. This hip impingement is a conversation about sleep and stress and breathing. Like, whoa, I had no idea. Right, that's right. And ultimately, that's why we think sport is such a powerful tool, or training for sport, or training for whatever that feels like for sport. Such a powerful tool and organizing system so that we can actually get to trying to transform society. And to your point, we don't have to actually reform physical therapy. That's a mistake. Our job is to practice in such a powerful way that makes all other ways of practice obsolete. And that we have a whole, I'm praying that you all have a room in your house that's like Scrooge McDuck, just full of $100 bills. You have a secret stash, right? And what we see is that people are like, I want that. And I want to not burn out, and I want to make more money, and I want to have better relationships with the people I'm serving, and I want to serve their families. That's really how we'll change the whole thing. Because people are like, I went to that PT thing, and that is not what you're doing. What are you doing? You're like, PT. It's the new PT.
Yeah. So excuse me, on that note too, like if somebody does have a business, right, and as like a performance rehab professional, what do you think is like the most important things to maybe differentiate them from everybody else?
You should be married to my wife. That should be number one. You should have a business partner who is as savage and obsessed with this stuff as you are. That would be really useful. I think sometimes it's, how are you spending your time? Do you need an executive assistant who can answer emails? How do you get it so you can do the thing you want to do, which might be growing the business, right? If you're maxed out for 10 hours, trapped in I got to see this, we had physios who worked with us who were afraid to take any hour off for development because they were the primary breadwinner, and every hour meant X amount of dollars, and they couldn't grow out of that system, right? They were going to be like, well, I'm trapped. I can only see 40 hours a week. I'm like, you're going to see 40 patients this week? I'm like, ooh, see you on the flip side, when are you going to get better at your job? When are you going to develop a practice? When are you going to, answer those emails, or get on, or be curious, or mess around with your friends, So I think really idea of trying to organize yourself and be professional in the way we do it. And we don't probably get enough of that. How can we, training, how can we streamline this process that you can do the creative thing? Because if you don't have any time or space at the end, because ultimately, if you work for yourself, this is a 24-hour day thing. This is what we do. And I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed all the time. There's no off button. I'm up this morning texting with people in Europe, right? Early on. I mean, and I'm like, it's not a job. This is what I do, So, but there are lines where I'm like, I'm not working, or at least the work I'm doing is I'm choosing to do these things. So I have to create process. The other thing I would say, and this is crucially important. Like this is probably, forget everything else I said. It's probably not applicable to you at all. But if you're in a relationship, you better take care of that relationship. And I know a lot of young entrepreneurs who, man, they are unhappy and their relationships are suffering. And they're like, if I can just make enough money or work really hard, I'll take care of my family and my needs will be met. The only thing that matters is your family. And if you have a family, then you need to focus all these things through this lens. Does this get me more time together with my family or less time together with my family? Juliet and I we have extraordinary, look, we're from like broken homes, dysfunctional families. We learn to self-soothe with work and sport. So we're like, oh, we're super stressed. We should just work more. Like that. We have a freakish work pain tolerance to a place where, if we didn't have kids and lives, we could just work 24/7. And so one of the things we started doing about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we started this thing called the feelings meeting, which you maybe have heard me talk about. And we put it on the calendar, and once a week we sit down and we say, how's it going? And it gives us a chance to actually apply the same level of honesty and humility and curiosity to our relationship, which is the most important relationship in my life, as my wife, to the same thing that I'm obsessed around with, how can we get you to generate more wattage in the pool? So understand that I think you really have to be looking at, if I'm so burned out, I can't show up for my partner, or I'm not applying the same aspects to the things, the same passion to my relationship, you're going to burn out and end up alone. You guarantee it.
Yeah.
It's a very valid point.
Yeah. It's real and it's common. I mean, anybody who's started a business knows how hard it is.
It's unsustainable.
Yeah.
And anyone who's done anything rad, everybody, works at an intensity that will kill them, and then realizes, okay, I can't do this anymore. That's a feature, not a bug. That's just what you know. That's like, you're going to burn out and you'll be like, am I burned out? If you're asking your question, am I burned out? You're burned out. I remember in PT school with a baby and a gym and blah, blah, blah. I'm in a communications class and we're talking about burnout. And I was like, I left and I didn't come back. And I got in trouble because they're like, you left, you can't just leave. I was like, I didn't need a lecture about burnout. I was burned out. So I was like, can I do the makeup lecture about burnout? So, I think that, you've got to have a practice yourself where you exercise and breathe hard, where you are practicing. And a lot of times for me, I train by myself. I have great training partners. My wife is the best training partner ever. Our friends are great training partners, but sometimes I train by myself because it gives me a chance to practice and iterate and mess around and see things on the internet. And you've got to do that. We put in a sauna at our house. And the reason is, it hits the brakes. When we're maniacs, you hit the brake and you can now go to sleep. So if you're not doing the fundamentals, you will burn out and die, and you're not going to be good to anyone. So just understand that it is a feature to work really hard, but there's going to be a point where you have to say, this doesn't work. To that point, if you ask Juliet what she would do, one of the things she would say is, well, are you folding your own laundry? Are you cleaning your own house? Could you offload that? Could you get someone to fold your laundry or clean your house, so that when you have an hour or two, you now can put it into the most important relationships, which are the relationships that you have with clinicians or your family or your partner, wherever it is. But I would say I really think about in those terms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great point. So as we wrap up here, I just want to again highlight the importance, as you, Kelly, have done so well, on just mobility and movement and performance and wearing all the different hats and thinking from different perspectives. As a physical therapist and uplifting the industry, adults have to be active, take an active role in taking care of their bodies so that they can continue moving well and aging gracefully. And so by taking hold of this knowledge, and if you're not familiar, be sure to check out Kelly's books and website, and you can help level up the rehab industry and arm active adults with the tools they need to move better. Thank you, Kelly, for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. You two are killing it, and it's so fun to watch.
Thank you.